Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Aaron Cybertron Zhang, and I'm joined by James Baek. And today for Beastcoast Pokemon, we are going to be talking about the state of the VGC Series 1 metagame. Series 1 has been out for a couple of weeks, and of course, we are slowly creeping towards the very first regional championship of the new season. That's going to be in San Diego at the very start of January. James and I are here to just kind of break down all the recent events and talk about, the interesting teams and kind of just general meta trends. So first of all, James, how are you feeling?
Feeling great. It's been a long time since we've done a meta-analysis, and it's our first one in Scarlet and Violet. And there are a lot of tournaments, and have been a lot of tournaments, and it's been pretty exciting seeing Scarlet and Violet growing this well, and a lot of different teams, and a really fast-paced meta too. It feels like it's really just been evolving every single week. It's like something new pops up, and it's like, man, it's really going by fast. It's actually insane.
Yeah, every single week is a great way to describe it, because I feel like after each weekend a new team pops up and it shapes the meta a little bit differently, and there's new counters to things that have been popular. So it's really exciting to see how fast things are developing, but it also can be a little bit overwhelming. And of course, that's why James and I are here to break down everything for you all. So we're going to cover a couple of events that have happened throughout the last few weeks. These are all relatively major tournaments that had some really interesting teams. And so the first one we're going to talk about is the Limitless tournament, which happened right at the start of December. I think it had over 400 players. And yeah, we, definitely feel like set the early meta for Series 1. Hey guys, Cybertron. Relax, I was just gonna get there. Anyway, as this little buddy was saying, 80% of you aren't subscribed to the channel, so hit that subscribe button. It really helps. Hey, what Pokemon are you?
Yeah, absolutely. This one had a lot of variants too, because this was pretty much the first big online major that we had for Scarlet and Violet. And as you could tell by the teams, if they pop up on screen, there are a lot of different Pokemon if you look at this top cut, which is absolutely incredible. So you see Pokemon that are new, like Ceruledge, which has been a great pick, Golden Go, of course, the Dondozo, Tatsugiri, Armorage. You got a lot of new Pokemon, the Annihilate, the Skeledirge, and then you got some of the old favorites, which we never really saw too much in VGC before, but have been popping up with this format. Like Breloom is back, which is cool, as well as Gallade, which has gotten some new tools. We even had a team that consisted of all not Gen 9 Pokemon, which I thought was pretty funny in the top cut. But yeah, just a lot of teams. There's a lot of them that are available, and a lot of the team sheets are actually listed on the Limitless tour. They don't have EVs, but they do have the full movesets and items. So if you do want to check it out, make sure you check it out, because there's a lot of cool teams in this bracket.
For sure. Yeah, I feel like this tournament, a lot of cool stuff. And it also showed just the strength of Murkrow compositions. We knew Murkrow was going to be pretty strong, right? Before Series 1 is even announced. But the combination of Murkrow, Hydreigon, and Golden Go, especially in this top 9, was super prevalent, right? And so it just features some of the strongest attackers in the game right now. I do think Fede's team that won was really cool. It featured Ceruledge, and not many other players even brought Ceruledge to the tournament. So he was able to utilize it with the bulk up set, which was really awesome. But yeah, I feel in terms of trying to understand, okay, which new Scarlet and Violet Pokemon are very strong, there are a couple that very much established themselves immediately. You look at this top cut, and you have the Ceruledge, the Armorage, the Skeledirge, the Meowscarada, the Golden Go. And these are Pokemon that people have already been playing with a bunch, and I think they are some of the strongest. Annihilate, of course, and then 2 Dondozo Tatsugiris in the top 4. Of course, that is the brand new duel that really has caused a lot of terror so far in Scarlet and Violet.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of players have to prep for, because it's similar to Eevee in the way it played in 2017, for instance, where you get a boost +2 to all your stats, and Dondozo can be used as a really effective sweeper once you have Commander Tatsugiri on the field. It is locked in, however, yet it is really scary, especially with Terra, which allows it to play very differently depending on which Terra type. We've seen a bunch of different Terras, like Flying Terra Blast. We've seen the Grass Terra. We've seen just Dragon in general to power up with Order Up, which for some reason increases attack stat every time you use the move, even if it's through Protect or if you hit into a Fairy type for some reason. So it's a really hard mod to stop, and that's why we've seen all these Murkrows, because one of the few effective ways to help against Dondozo and Tatsugiri is the Haze. So having a way to stop setup is really huge, and we've seen some pretty clever techs on these teams as well. For instance, we've seen things like the Clear Smog Gastrodon that was actually Terra Fairy, for instance, that was actually on Polar Bear's team, got into the top 8, which was pretty cool. And then you have, like, of course, you have the Murkrows, and then you just got like a lot of offense. You have Sacred Sword on the delay to do some damage. You got the unaware Skeledirge. So that is a duo that's definitely have to be respected, and we're still seeing it consistently, however, throughout all these tournaments so far.
For sure, yeah. And, we've only really talked about like the top cut teams, but you go down and of course there are more interesting Pokemon. And yeah, I think one of the coolest things right now in VGC is that there are just so many events happening all the time. And so like each weekend, it feels like there's another big online tournament and there's really cool teams that pop up and results from it. So there's a lot to digest from the Limitless event in itself. But to me, like it was very clear that Murkrow Tailwind compositions in general were really strong. Aaron Trailer's team that finished in second, I thought was a really cool early meta team where it utilized Tailwind on Hydreigon, but also a Trick Room on Armor Rouge as well as Meowscarada, which I think was really clever. And then you have some teams that utilize, Grimmsnarl, just setting up screens. Bulk Up Annihilate is something I feel like that's been picking up in usage as well. Yeah, Tracecar Final Gambit, of course, is kind of the other way that people are using it in terms of popularity. But yeah, kind of set the pace for early Series 1 VGC. And that brings us to the Limitless tournament, the Victory Road tournament that took place.
Yeah, so the Victory Road tournament happened like a few weeks afterward, and there were quite a few interesting changes. We still see, like, I think this is where we see like the rise of Meowscarada, because a few weeks after the Limitless tour, Meowscarada popped in, and one of the reasons why Meowscarada has been popping in is because it has a really strong signature move in Flower Trick, which is a 70 base power move, kind of similar to Urshifu's Wicked Blow. Luckily, it doesn't hit or protect, yet it always guarantees a critical hit, and it's very effective against Dondozo, which is why we've seen a few Terra types to actually counter these Flower Tricks and resist it, like the Steel and Grass ones we've been seeing. But it's a very effective option in knockoff coverage. Like, it's just really fast. Base 123 is one of the fastest Pokemon in the format. Again, Trick Room access. It's a really strong pick right now, and I think after this tournament, like, we've just been seeing Meowscarada everywhere.
I agree. I think like it's interesting because this tournament and the Limitless tournament, like, they weren't that far away, but they actually look so different. First of all, the first place team, and we got to talk about that. There's a Paw Mod on the team. I think Revival Blessing strategies in general have not really been explored much, and Adrian Hurley was able to win with Revival Blessing Paw Mod, which synergizes, of course, with Dondozo Tatsugiri. And I feel like it's not a coincidence that both of the finalists also had a Gothitelle on the team, right? Gothitelle is a Pokemon that historically has been very good throughout many years of VGC, won the World Championships before, and it's very valuable, I think, as a potential counter to Dondozo Tatsugiri, because it obviously prevents you from switching out. And so by, forcing Tatsugiri to just stay in while Dondozo doesn't like get to come out and you can just KO Tatsugiri is really interesting as a concept. And so, yeah, I'm like not surprised to see it, but at the same time, I was like, wow, there aren't really any other Gothitelles if you look down, to like the top 32. And then like the two Gothitelle players both made it to the finals, which was cool. And then the other thing is like Mousehold. This Pokemon actually, surprisingly, if you look at the Limitless tournament, like just wasn't in the top 8 or top 9 at all. But in this tournament, like it was in 3rd and 4th place, right? And I think like the 4th place team, it's kind of a preview for the Tainan regionals that we'll talk about in just a little bit. But Mousehold is just like a huge offensive threat, right? With Population Bomb and Wide Lens, this thing is just literally has like one of the strongest attacks in the history of Pokemon, which is crazy given the, how it, like it's game design. But yeah, I feel like the people are picking up on both like Meowscarada's and Mousehold as like really good, strong, brand new Pokemon. But I thought the finalist teams are really interesting. Like I don't know the full details about them, but the way they play, like they look to be like fairly bulky and not as like fast paced and hyper offensive as some of the other teams we had seen.
Yeah, I believe the first place there was like Fake Out and Trick Room with Torkoal, and you had like a bunch of different modes. You had the Tatsugiri, Meowscarada, you had the Dondozo combination you could just trap. There's Revival Blessing. There's just a lot of big threats. And then the second place team, if I remember right, it's like a Life Orb, Terra flying on the Gyarados, and just like general bulky Pokemon like the King Gambit that's really actually takes a lot of hits with its great defensive bulk that I got from evolving from Bisharp. Arcanine was pretty standard, Amoonguss. But I do feel like we've seen a lot of Pokemon that just, I mean, this really just shaped up differently. Like the fact that Azumarill, I think, was a big Pokemon actually in this tournament. A lot of players were actually using Azumarill. And there were a lot of different sets, ironically. There was Citrus Berry, 3 attacks. It plays differently from Azumarill in the past because most of the Azumarills we normally saw back in the day, like Gen 6, Gen 7, were usually Belly Drum. But because of Haze Murkrow that's been so popular, many players have opted not to go for Haze. But Water Fairy is just an incredible typing, of course. Good against a lot of the Dozo like attacks like Wave Crash, and of course the Order Up being immune to it. So you had 3 attacks, Azumarill with Protect. Then you got some Perish variants as well with Perish Song Sap Zipper, which has been a common counter to Meowscarada recently, and it's been popping up quite a bit, especially right now. And yeah, there was just a lot of cool Pokemon. We had like rain and just a bit of weather showing up, but still surprising that weather, of course, hasn't been as popular, but other than maybe like just Tyranitar, but not without the Sand move. But as we'll see throughout the rest of the tournaments, that weather has been picking up a bit.
For sure. Yeah, I think like the last thing I thought was notable about like the top eight. I mean, there are two things, like two Gardevoirs being in the top eight, which I think is really interesting. Gardevoir, I feel like not really having too much chance to shine after maybe winning Worlds in 2014. I mean, they did get a Mega Evolution, I guess, and so that it was decent. But Gardevoir making an appearance, and then King Gambit, I feel like, is also just a really solid Pokemon. You know, you had already mentioned a little bit about it before, but I basically like it's just really consistent and like does a lot of damage and doesn't necessarily need to like outspeed things because of priority Sucker Punch. I think your point on weather is a really interesting one. I feel like we've seen a couple of weather teams here and there like succeed, but like players aren't utilizing it nearly as much as like before, right? You look at early Sword and Shield, like Tyranitar Excadrill, really easy mode to execute, but some of the weather like combos that are out there aren't necessarily maybe as easy to play with. So as a result, like we see some cool Pelipper, like Palafin teams or Pelipper Dreadnought, for example. But I feel like it's not as easy to, you know, just pick up immediately. And so as a result, like we don't see it really as commonly throughout like this top 32.
Yes, but yeah, there were a lot of crazy Pokemon, and I guess we'll just move on to our next event, which I believe is the Tainan Regional Championship. And this was the first regional of Scarlet and Violet. It was a pretty crazy event. It was a top 16, 6 rounds of Swiss. I believe this was a close team sheet. Yeah, it was close team sheet. And it was actually a lot more centralized than I think a lot of players were expecting, given the online results that we've been seeing.
Totally. This was definitely kind of going back to the Murkrow stuff that really worked out well. And 5 of the top 8 teams had Murkrow Hydreigon, as well as, you know, the Golden Go. And so once again, this core is really just kind of everywhere right now. Or sorry, 4 of the 5 teams. The winning team actually didn't have Golden Go. But some very clear trends, right? Like Murkrow's clear partners are right now, like, you know, the Hydreigon, the Armor Rouge, the Golden Go are all popular. Mousehold this time being able to win the entire event as well. A lot of the other Murkrow teams actually didn't utilize Mousehold. But yeah, I think I was also surprised to see kind of how centralized it really was. The winning team had Trick Room Focus Sash Meowscarada, which is something that Aaron Trailer, I feel like, made popular through the Limitless tournament, and also a Choice Specs Hydreigon, and so it synergizes nicely with Murkrow because, of course, you can haze away Draco Meteor special attack drops, which is one of the other benefits of haze, and then just the combination of Indeedee and Armor Rouge, which obviously does a lot of damage with Psychic type attacks. And so, yeah, I definitely, when I saw the top 8, I was like, wow, I'm like pretty surprised that there were so many Murkrow Hydreigon teams, and I think as time evolves, like people will figure out, you know, more consistent ways to beat it. I will say, like, I thought the Hariyama on the top 4 team was really interesting, where it was a Flame Orb set with Fake Out, Knockoff, Close Combat, and Bullet Punch.
The usage stats, I'm trying to remember them off the top of my head because I actually made a document about all the top 16 teams. So 9 out of the 16 teams featured one of Meowscarada, Annihilate, and Hydreigon, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
8 of them had Murkrow, so half of them, and I think 8 of them also had Golden Go. There were 6 Armor Rouges, and most of them had Wide Guard, or the Hariyama would have Wide Guard in this case. So the two Hariyamas, there was one with the Bullet Punch, Terra Steel, and the other one was just a Wide Guard set. So I thought that was pretty interesting. There were a few techs on these teams which I thought were pretty cool. For instance, we saw 2 Rajaraps. I don't know how you pronounce that Pokemon, but it has both of them are actually in Prison Trick Room. So that was the denied Trick Room, although Armor Rouge was very common, and all of the Armor Rouges, the 6 of them, did have Trick Room on their teams. We also saw that the Annihilapes, most of them were actually the bulky ones. So there were, like, I believe 3 Choice Scarf variants and 6 bulk up sets. And most of the bulk up sets were leftovers. They were different Terra types, if I'm not mistaken. I've seen Fire, Water, and Steel from each of them. And I think bulk up Annihilate has been something that's crazy because you can... It's a really insanely... Like, it just has really incredible stats with its really high base HP, really decent defenses you can invest in. And then bulk up, while stacking the Rage Fist boost on top of it, is pretty insane. And that's something I think this tournament really well demonstrated. And then we had some really cute techs, like, for instance, there was the Choice Specs Gudra that was Terra Water with Sap Zipper, which was pretty cool to see. The Anger Point Tauros, that was Water, but it was Terra Fire, so something you could do with the Meowscarada, which this opponent had. You could Flower Trick your own Tauros. Fire it, and then you have Anger Point, so you get the +6 attack immediately and get KOs. So there was a lot of cool stuff, even though this tournament might not look. This tournament did look centralized. There were some surprises, but all the mouse holds, which were 4 of them, were wide lens population bomb, and it's a really big threat.
Yeah, to me, it just like shows how one popular these team compositions are, and then two, like if you're trying to win seriously in Series 1 VGC, like you're going to need answers into these kind of compositions, right? And so it's funny, I think like I tried out the first place team. It's super powerful, but you know, your Pokemon can go down really quickly, and like you don't have, for example, like Protect on Hydreigon. Mousehold actually, it gets countered by a lot. Like I feel like Rocky Helmet's picking up as an item in general to kind of counter this. And I think a good team needs Mousehold answers, because this thing can really just like completely destroy things with Population Bomb. And so whether it be like a Ghost type on your team or a Rocky Helmet or like a Rock Terra, Steel Terra, Normal Terra. I guess Normal Terra is something I've not really seen too much of, but could be. Sorry, not Normal Terra, Ghost Terra. I was like, wait, why? Yeah, I haven't seen Normal Terra as an answer to Mousehold. But that's because Mousehold's the one Normal Terraing. So yeah, I think like it's a Pokemon that you're going to really need counters for, but even when you have counters, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll just beat it. But yeah, I think like given how centralized this tournament was, you know, if I were preparing for Series 1 VGC events, I'd be like, okay, I definitely need to at least have a solid answer against kind of some of the different versions of this team running around right now.
No, it's absolutely a threat. There were also some like Terra Grasses to avoid the Amoonguss Rage Powder and just Population Bomb past the Rage Powder, which the Amoonguss will usually carry the Rocky Helmet. So, and then of course Terra Normal to absolutely obliterate something that it already doesn't. And you really don't want to have just to miss one Population Bomb, which is a 1%. You don't want to rely on that. So yeah, there were quite a bit of centralization, but I think the next couple of tournaments kind of showcase that it kind of differs a little bit because the meta keeps evolving. And there are 2 events that happened in the same weekend. I think why not cover the Victory Road tournament first, which was an invitational with the top players from Spain. And there were some really interesting picks right here.
Yeah, for sure. And it's important to note, like, these are literally just a week away from each other. And so things are developing so rapidly. So the Victory Road tournament was held on December 18th. The Taiwan Regionals was December 10th. Like, the Victory Road online tournament was also December 10th. And so it's like, we literally are seeing so much progression in just the span of a week and 2 weeks, right? And yeah, like this was an 8-person invitational, so you know people might have felt more comfortable bringing specific strategies that maybe they wouldn't bring to like a huge tournament. But the first place team used by Torviv had Lycanroc and Tyranitar, and this is the new weather duel that's really popped up. James, you were kind of alluding to it earlier, and it's really good.
Yeah. So one thing for the viewers, I actually didn't watch the stream fully yet, but I believe most Lycanrocs have been popular on ladder racing, especially within like the last 2 weeks, which is when we're recording this, has been a very popular duo, mainly because of Endeavor Lycanroc. So the Lycanroc will usually carry Focus Sash, and even if it doesn't proc Focus Sash, you have the move Indoor, and Lycanroc's a pretty frail Pokemon, so it can easily be brought to 1 HP. And then you can Endeavor with the combination of like Sandship and just eliminate Pokemon immediately. It's another way that players have been trying to counteract opposing Dundozos and just like a bunch of other bulkier stuff. It's a really annoying wall breaker, which can be very difficult to stop, especially with Indoor. You got like fast Rock Slide, so of course you're going to be playing the flinch game as well. So it is definitely a duo that has to be respected. The Tyranitars have been pretty interesting. Most of them have been running the Terra Flying with the Assault Vest, so Terra Blast can help break through stuff like Amoonguss and fighting types. You also are immune to Earthquake, and then you have like Ice Punch and really good coverage with Tyranitar with like Crunch or Assurance for Golden Go, followed up with like a strong Rock Slide. It's just like a really strong duo right now, and they've been all very much paired with like Tatsugiri and Dundozo.
For sure, yeah. I think like all the teams here in this like tournament were just interesting, right? Like Casti, who finished second at Worlds, bringing like a Baxcalibur, a Salazzle. I think like Fake Out in general is actually fairly interesting to me right now because like I feel like people aren't using it as much as I actually would have expected. And then Salazzle in itself is just being a really interesting option, also fairly speedy. Skeledirge was in 3rd and 4th place here, and I think that's the Pokemon that it's just very strong. People are using it in different ways, whether it be like unaware with Grass Terra or Fairy Terra, kind of to actually beat opposing Dondozos. Like that's the main use case I've seen from it. But this thing can just snowball games so quickly thanks to Torch Song, right? Getting special attack boost. And I think it having access to Slack Off for a really consistent means of recovery also, just allows it to be very consistent. But you look at all the teams here, like there's a Houndstone, there's a Salamence, Palafin, Toad's Cruel, Palmot. It just goes to show really the number of, new Pokemon that are viable.
Fun fact, we've been seeing like weather kind of rise a bit more and more lately. We've seen some rain teams do well, like in the VR tournament, and sand, of course, has been probably the most popular meta or popular weather, I think, right now currently in the meta. I've seen a lot of Tyranitar Lycanroc teams for the most part. And then, of course, Alex actually had brought a rain team. Rain teams are pretty interesting, especially with Palafin. With the Jet Punch, it does do a lot of damage in rain and its priorities. So as a way to really just break through teams, especially with a choice banded one. And yeah, the third place also had Houndstone, which is a Sandrushmon, which I don't know what it really has. I guess it has Last Respects, which is an interesting move because it gains power for every fallen member of you in a battle, but it's pretty unique right here, I'd say. But yeah, Dondozo Tatsugiri, here's one duo that is not going away. As you can see, it's still placing really well. It's because of the limited counters we've seen. There's been some interesting innovations for counters, but you have to deal with 4 more mons other than Tatsugiri and Dondozo, and it's still doing well at these tournaments.
Absolutely. That brings us to the final event, which is the LCS, which is, I think, like a Japanese tournament that took place the same weekend. And they actually had usage stats for like all the Pokemon. And you can see like kind of what percentage of teams had it. So I think this is a really good kind of analysis for what Pokemon you should be expecting right now. And like, I was like, I knew Meowscarada was popular, but I was like, for it to be on 44% of teams is absolutely wild. Like, this thing is everywhere. We also haven't really talked about Sylveon too much, but this Pokemon I think is just so strong thanks to getting access to Hyper Voice and then like Fire Terra Blast, for example, as well. A lot of the other Pokemon, like, not super surprised about, but like, yeah, Meowscarada at 1 and Sylveon at 3, I was like, oh, that definitely caught my eye.
Yeah, Sylveon's been pretty nice, especially with like one of the most common, like 2 of the common Pokemon right now are Golden Go and of course the Hydreigon. But of course Hydreigons have been running some interesting Terras, but Sylveon can also counteract like Terra Steel and do well against Terra Fire Hydreigon, or at least tank attacks and do some really strong Hyper Voices right here, because the Terra Fire allows Sylveon to do well against Golden Go as well. And it's a pretty strong Pokemon. It's been pretty mixed between mostly Throat Spray and the Babiri Berry sets, which was more popular, I think, early on when Golden Go was like very common, but now we're seeing a lot more of the Throat Sprays just in general to power up, because Pixie Play is no longer in the game, so I have to boost the special attack one way or another. So Sylveon has been rising up, and yeah, we have some very interesting teams, especially in this top 8. So something about this top 8 team, if you don't know, it looks pretty standard on paper, but there is some pretty interesting text on it. Specifically, it's going to be the Torment Murkrow on this team and the Focus Energy Hydreigon. So Torment's an interesting move because for instance, a lot of Pokemon are running some choice items right now. You can go for a Torment with Murkrow, and then they can't go for the attack this second time around. So they might be forced to switch, and then that gives you an opportunity to set up with like Hydreigon Focus Energy. And if you don't know this, Hydreigon had Scope Lens as well. So when you go for Focus Energy and with the Scope Lens equipped, you actually have a 100% chance guaranteed to get a critical hit with either Draco Meteor and Heat Wave. And it's been something that actually has been rising up, especially in this Japanese tournament. I believe there were a few of them, and it's for Dondozo, because breaking through Dondozo is already pretty hard because you're usually forced to bring Haze Murkrow. It's why we've seen the Sand teams do well with Dondozo, because Murkrow usually being brought doesn't exactly appreciate double Rock Slide or switching into it. So another way players have been trying to get around that, of course, with the Focus Energy Hydreigon. So it's really something that's picked up recently.
Yeah, for sure. I think like this top 8 actually feels like a good mix of all the other tournaments we'd covered, right? Like we've got the Gothitelle compositions, which actually very much resemble the 2 Gothitelle teams that were in the finals of that Victory Road tournament. We've got Murkrow at first place and top 4 as well. We've got a bunch of different Dondozo Tatsugiri, teams. And yeah, like even with people aiming to counter Dondozo Tatsugiri, like 4 of the teams in the top 8 had it, right? And then we had a little bit of weather with Pelipper and Palafin in the top 8 as well. So this feels like maybe actually it's fitting to maybe end on this tournament because it feels like it captures a lot of the other tournaments that we had talked about so far. But it's clear that Murkrow Tailwind still looks really good. Gothitelle oriented, like slower paced teams look really interesting, whether it be with Dondozo, Tatsugiri, Revival Blessing, or kind of just like potential setup with a Dragon Dance Gyarados. And then some of these other Dondozo Tatsugiri teams, I mean, yeah, they just feature really strong Pokemon, right? Like it has the Annihilate, but has the Maushold. I think Volcarona being that top 4 team really caught my eye. And then Palmot just being in 2 different teams here means that this is certainly a Pokemon I think you need to have on your radar at this point, given that people are performing very well with it. And Murkrow's not going anywhere anytime soon either.
Yeah, as long as we're seeing Tatsugiri and Dondozo, and as long as it's one of the 2 Pokemon that can get a priority Tailwind, Murkrow seems like it will definitely be still continue to be a top mon because, again, very limited answers to Dondozo. You cannot counter it with like stat increases because most of them, or almost all of them at this point, do run the unaware ability, so you can't even use like setup mons to try to break through it, which is why we've seen like that Focus Energy Hydreigon. But yeah, Haze, incredible. And I think it's also another interesting factor. We talked about Azumarill a little bit, and one of the things is Perish Song, and that's kind of another thing that players have been kind of trying to utilize to beat Dondozo. We've been seeing that. Snow actually ran that on his second place team with the Sing and Hypnosis Gothitelle to try and stall out some turns, and then you could set up for the Perish Song. So a lot of ways, a lot of Dondozos, a lot of trying to counter it. We'll see, I guess, at the end of the series, like, you know, who's going to win at this point. Do you just use Dondozo to beat opposing Dondozo, or are you going to try to find more counters that maybe are unexplored, which is really difficult to do in this meta?
For sure. And with the meta evolving as rapidly as it is, you know, we'll just have to see what other new answers people come up with. But hopefully this has been helpful for all of you. I think actually it was interesting just even talking through. I was like, I didn't realize just how quickly things have been developing and how new Pokemon and new sets were popping up every week. And so, yeah, like James said, this is our first time doing kind of a meta recap for Scarlet and Violet. We definitely want to bring you more content like this. So let us know how you enjoyed it and, you know, how we can improve the video concept as well. And yeah, I think that basically covers this video. So James, I don't know if you have any final words before we say goodbye.
All right, I guess I'll ask you one thing, Aaron. How do you think San Diego is going to shape up with the current meta right now?
I think like Dondozo Tatsugiri is still really good. Like even all the counters that people like have to it, like a really smart player with Dondozo Tatsugiri, I feel like is so scary to go up against. So I don't know. Like, I think that I'm definitely interested in seeing whether or not top players decide it's actually a path that's viable towards exploring. But even having like just I feel like every time I play against it, I'm still like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't feel that great. And if my opponent just did this one thing differently to get the setup properly, I would have lost. And so I have my eyes out on that duel still going into San Diego. And yeah, it's a question of what you were saying earlier. Is it going to win, or are people going to counter it as hard as they can? That is going to be it for the meta recap. So thank you for joining James and myself. And yeah, I think are really excited to keep updating you on how the meta goes. I think it's honestly very educational and informative for me as we do these as well. So once again, thank you so much as always for watching, and we'll see you at the next one.